Today, I wanted to talk about an article I found on The Atlantic. Conservatives have a different definition of fair, and liberals ignore it at their peril. I thought it was interesting because the guy that wrote it is his name's Dan Meager, and he actually Megan rather. He actually wrote a book called "America the Fair: Using Brain Science to Create a More Just Nation." So it's kind of his specialty. It was interesting to see a kind of a science perspective on why there's this political divide. He talks about how typically, in his opinion, liberals think of fairness based on need and based on, there are people who have more than they need and there are people who have less. And so we need to make these people more equal to each other. And that creates a system of fairness. Now, in his opinion, conservatives, and this is a quote, conservatives tend to value equity or proportionality, and they see unfairness when people are asked to contribute more than they should expect to receive in return, or when people receive more than they contribute. He then builds this analogy where he talks about two college students who, ostensibly have the same amount of debt, graduate at the same time. One of them works hard, pays it off, and is on their merry way. The other struggles, doesn't get it paid off. Then, say we elect a presidential candidate who's saying we're going to wipe out that debt. Their counter argument there is that when his debt gets wiped out, it's not fair to the first student because that one, it's not proportionate. She put in all this effort, she paid it off, she did all this work, whereas he didn't do any of that. And now the person who did pay it off also has to pay in taxes to pay off his while he didn't do anything. Um, I can kind of get on board that. It makes a sort of sense, but it really reminded me of like when I was a kid and you would see some kid, a friend or whatever, get something that you didn't. And you'd be so upset because I demand a proportionate or equitable, thing. Johnny got a cookie, I get a cookie. And you would get so mad. And basically, the teacher would just say, well, life's not fair. Or, your mom or whoever it would be. It would boil down to this life's not fair. Um, and yet when we're adults, that still carries through, but now that creates this big divide where some of us accepted that like fairness isn't just about we both get a cookie. And in the case of a cookie, it's, student one ate her cookie, student two not only doesn't get a cookie but is also suffering for having not gotten a cookie. Like it's not an equivalent exchange. It's not like buying an item. The item has already been purchased. Both of them have it. It's just that one of them gets to have it and enjoy it, and the other one, their entire life is being hampered and impacted. Not only that, but also my thought was conservatives have this idea that it's not about equal outcomes; it's about equal input for equal outcomes. So if you put in as much work as I do, then you deserve the same outcome as I do. But if you don't put in as much work, you don't get as much of an outcome. And again, that works in some situations, like, say, hourly wage. But I think ultimately for me, when it comes down to things like student debt and social equality and making the world a better place to live in, it ignores the fact that I may not be capable of putting in the same input. And I might have a completely different life situation. I might have all other things that are working against me, whereas perhaps you have much more privilege and a much easier pathway to paying that off than I did, and that debt is going to much have a much greater impact on me than someone who has more privilege in essence. Um, so I mean, what's your take on this idea of proportionality and you know fairness in general?
Well,
Because I have more to say, but I'm curious to
well,
see what you think of that so far.
it seems like what you're advocating for is what they would the conservatives would likely call you're advocating for equality of outcome as opposed to
Mm.
equality of opportunity. And this is the big distinction that I think they like to stand on is that yes, I support equal opportunity, but not equal outcome. And so what I would ask you is how would you get to where you want to go? Would does your ideology are you saying that for example there should be a certain number of women in each place, and so like you would actually not hire a qualified a more qualified male because you need 4 females and 4 males, and so you can't take this hyper qualified guy because you need this is I'm trying to play devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear
so
you.
is that are you saying that is more fair to do it that way? And even though the argument that they would make is that the person who you don't hire merely because you need a 4th female, that he's getting hosed unfairly.
Well, again, I think they're trying to set up that like you can just have an apples to apples outcome comparison. Like with these college people, the one who pays off the debt, or in your instance, let's keep your analogy, if the guy is getting hosed just because, it's not the same, because his outcome is not, or her outcome, whoever gets hired, they're not directly comparable. I mean, there's more that goes into outcome. If we're just going to break it down to simple, basic, one gets the job and one doesn't, the guy gets hosed. But the guy also has better opportunities.
I'm granting all of that, but I'm saying, is that what you're advocating for? Is you want to live in a world where that guy does get hosed? That's the...
Not necessarily. I mean, I guess I'm still figuring.
Or you're saying you reject the language.
I reject this idea that, fairness is so simple a concept as to be everyone, it's only fair if you worked for it, or it's only fair if the input is equal, or it's only fair if you need a better outcome than this person. I think, it's not so black and white, and it's frustrating that, we do have this divide in fairness, as it were, as to what's fair for others. And I guess my ideology is we need to consider a grander scope. And I think it's possible that there are situations where the most fair system is the idea of proportionality, and other times the most fair system is one based on need. And I think the long-term goal is what benefits everyone the most. So, I mean, in the case of like college, I think in the long run, not having an entire generation or multiple generations burdened with literally $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in student debt, I think that's good for everyone.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.